Orthodox Internet radio connection.
Welcome to Live with the Louhs with your hosts, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Lowe, where we will connect our Orthodox faith to day-to-day living and relationships to our family, our work, and our view of ourselves. Father Nicholas is the priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, and Dr. Roxanne is a licensed clinical psychologist who uses her extensive training in private practice. Questions are welcome by calling 855-237-2346. That's 855-237-2346. Here now is Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Live with the Louhs. My name is Father Nicholas Lowe, and I'm the parish priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church right here in Jacksonville, Florida. And I'm joined by my lovely wife and co-host, Dr. Roxanne Lowe.
Good evening, everyone. Good to be with you.
And who is a clinical psychologist. And we're so excited that you're taking the time to join us on this Tuesday, January 24th. You know, if you're new to Live with the Louhs, one thing that you should know is that our prayer is that this show, we're interested in listening to our shows that airs every single Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time right here on Ancient Faith Radio. Before we dive into tonight's really important topic, friends, we do want to encourage you to stay connected to us all throughout the week by joining our social media platforms. Friends, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, all under the headings of The Louhs. And that last name is spelled quite uniquely. It's spelled Louhs. And so all of those platforms, including our sermons that we give, all of our just our messages throughout the week on our social media platforms are all found under that last name, The Louhs. In fact, our show is currently being broadcast live on our Louhs Facebook page, as well as Ancient Faith Facebook page. Experiencing individually, and sometimes we need a little word of encouragement to kind of give us some guidance throughout our day. So we started sending out these daily messages that simply, in many ways, are just like our radio shows that merge faith and psychology together. And you can subscribe to receiving them in your daily inbox by going to our website at thelouhs.com/subscribe. And all you have to do is put in your email address. Once again, that's thelouhs.com/subscribe. And every single day at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, you'll receive one of our messages. And if you're already receiving them, do us a favor. Help us to share the light of peace, the light of Christ with your friends and your family, and share those messages. I think that's one thing that we can all do a better job of, is just simply passing on, as the Bible says, the good news with others. We also want to encourage you today, especially today, but we do this at every one of our shows, is to get engaged in the show. You know, we truly believe that so much growth happens in the conversation, not in a really monologue, but more importantly, in a conversation. So join us tonight. You can do it a number of ways. You can pose your questions by calling in at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. You can also email us a question during the live broadcast of our show by emailing us at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. And as always, you can leave some comments on our Facebook page under the live broadcast of tonight's show. We'd love to get to them during the show. So friends, you know, throughout our lives, we can hear stories that inspire us, encourage us, really transform our lives. There are stories of triumph over tragedy, test over trials, stories of people overcoming tremendous odds, people whose stories literally tug at our heart. And tonight is one such story. Tonight we're speaking with a man named Jon Heymann, who's out with a brand new book called Agonizing Peace, Powering Through Traumatic Experiences. You can actually find it on Amazon. Jon Heymann, just so you know a little bit about him, has a professional background spanning 35 years that ranges from private ministry to public penitentiaries, and is now the president of Heymann Consulting. He recently created Elevate Jacksonville, right here in the city of Jacksonville. And prior to this was the CEO of Jacksonville's Children's Commission, providing $38 million to support numerous child-serving nonprofits. He holds a master's degree in education from the University of Florida and has completed graduate work in psychology and doctoral work at the University of North Florida. Mr. Numerous advisory boards and speaks to national conventions, to retreats, to conferences all around the country. He truly is an extraordinary person. One thing that truly motivated me about Jon is his story, and you're going to hear about it tonight. Jon, welcome to Live with the Louhs.
Thank you, Father Nick. Honor to be here.
So, Jon, let's dive right into your story. Why did you write this book? Why now? And take us on that journey.
Well, many people said I should have written it 20 years ago, but I didn't. And when I decided to actually take the time, and as you know, you and your wife have written a fantastic book, and it takes an immense amount of time and concentration. So when I decided to do it, I thought to myself, well, I could have written a children's book. It would have been a lot easier. But I wrote on a very, very tough subject for people going through very, very tough times. But my story is why I began the book. I didn't stay on my story the whole book, but I began on it. So this is why I wrote it. Because for years, I had many questions about my early childhood experiences. They were not good. I was born in Athens, Greece. I do not know who my real mother and father are. I was given up to the Athens Municipal Infant Asylum. How would you like to live in an asylum? Anyhow, that's where I was given up. Obviously, I don't remember the day, but apparently the story goes that there's a bread box there at the asylum. By the way, the asylum is still there. My wife and I have seen it. It's not an asylum anymore. It's an art gallery. I'll get to that in a minute. But they would drop babies off that they either couldn't feed. This was post-World War. 10 years after the war was over, 10 years after Hitler had conquered much of Europe, including Greece. He raised the flag over the Parthenon, but did not destroy the Parthenon. This is many years after, but the poverty and the loss of over 100,000 lives to Hitler's army, had a huge effect on the poverty level of the nation of Greece. And so many people would drop their babies off at these asylums. This was not the only one. I believe there was another one in Athens as well. But this was the major one. And we would be dropped off in a bread box, a box that was used to drop bread and milk and vegetables off for the children. And so we were called bread box babies. And then the most horrendous thing happened. A doctor, we just discovered this a number of years ago, a doctor would sign our death certificates. In other words, we didn't die, but he would sign certificates as if we did, so that when anybody came back to claim us, they would say, well, we're so sorry, but your boy died, or the baby that you dropped off here a year ago died. And of course, once you are dead, they can do anything to you they want, which is what they did. And so it is at this point where some of my memories come in, and that is that we were rented or sold into slavery. I don't know what else to call it. Child trafficking, we call it today, but it's really slavery. You had no say as a child, and you were put into these little houses. You were asked to go to the Acropolis. For those who know geography, the Acropolis is in the heart of Athens, and on top of it sits the Parthenon, the most revered building in the nation of Israel, in the nation of Greece. And we little boys had to go up there and beg. We begged, we stole, we kicked tourist ankles, tried to grab their wallets and run as fast as we could. And we went back to these, and I call them these faceless adults because I have no faces, never have had faces in my memory bank, just their stature. A short woman in a tiny house, a man that was always in the, second room of this tiny house that I was in. And if I didn't bring back enough money, or I didn't bring back enough rubble, meaning the rubble from the Parthenon, which of course even back then you were not allowed to take it, and you can't take it today either, but you can sell it if you can grab a piece and run as fast as you can. If I didn't bring enough back, I was beat up. And I clearly remember being thrown out of a window numerous times. So the mistreatment was pretty bad on us little guys. If you've ever seen the movie Slumdog Millionaire, you know what I'm talking about. And it took me 2 years to watch that movie. I just couldn't watch it when it came out because it brought back similar memories of what they did to me in Greece. Now, in Slumdog Millionaire, oddly enough, they cut off fingers and they would break the knees so that the legs would hobble, and because tourists were more apt to give to a disfigured child. I'm very grateful that I don't have those disfigurements. And it must mean I knew how to raise money back then, I guess. I don't know. But anyhow, I don't have those disfigurements. But the way you were treated and shuffled around and you didn't know who was going to hit you and all the rest. And when I was adopted probably 4 or 5 years old. I was adopted by the Heymans, hence my English last name. It's actually a German last name, Heymann, was changed. My Greek name is Pondalis Koudinos. But my American given name is Jon Heymann or Jonathan Heymann. But I remember coming over and I would not let an adult touch me for at least 2 years. And my family, the Heymans, were very, very huggy people. And I remember throwing basketballs at them because they would give me gifts. I remember throwing big metal things that they would give me. I was very weak. I was malnourished. But I would throw things as hard as I could at these adults because I didn't want to be touched. Because when adults touched me, they hurt me. So it took years. I remember the first time my mother did hug me. I'm talking about Louhs Heymann. I was in the kitchen in Teaneck, New Jersey, and I just kept my hands stiff to my side, ready to punch her if she tried to hurt me, but she didn't. And she had tried to hug me many times before. I just wouldn't let her. And this time I did, and I started to realize that trust is earned. You know, trust is earned, which is really a biblical concept. Forgiveness is free and trust is earned. And I came to realize that human beings are a product of reproduction, but children are a product of love. So when somebody says, who are you a child of? I say the Heymans. And I want to be clear in this interview, I'm not angry at Greece. I'm not angry at any Greeks, because I'm very proud that I'm from Greece. Greeks have an amazing heritage, and I'm very proud of that. I'm full-blooded Greek. Even Ancestry.com has said that. I'm just angry at the adults that designed something like this to use children like this. And I believe that Jesus' words... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, not to cut you, I really want to invite our listeners once again, that if they're interested in calling and speaking with you, they can call us right now at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. And you can also email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. Jon, as I'm listening to you, though, I can't help but think to myself, what was the motivating factor? Because, as you know, through something so extraordinarily traumatic that you experienced, not just on a day, and use it to be something that you used to be transformational in someone's life, and in writing this book, Agonizing Peace. Share that with our listeners.
Well, it was not just my story, but it was also telling the story of other people that went through horrendous traumatic experiences and watching the reaction of how they dealt with it. And I think of the Apostle Paul being in prison and saying, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice in prison. What would I say if I was in prison, And so I looked at a number of people that I personally witnessed them going through trauma, death of a 5-year-old, death of a 9-year-old, 5 children, 5 16-year-olds being killed in one car accident that was clearly avoidable, and dealing with the parents after. So I looked at all those things and I said to myself, where does my experience compare sometimes at all to, because some of these were horrendous. In the book, I go into quite a level of detail that I'm not going to do tonight. But why did some of the people come out fine, and why did the others not come out fine? Why have I come out fine? And there's a myriad, or I should say a variety of variables that help make somebody, but there are choices to make too. We each make choices. Here's an example. My son just bought a 30-year-old Jeep, and it has become a bigger project than he had wished for. And he analyzed it and then said, I'm not going to be paralyzed by analysis. You've heard of the paralysis of analysis. And he came to one of two choices. I either rebuild this Jeep or I discard it, one or the other. And our lives are the same way. We either rebuild our lives from the trauma we have gone through, or we discard our lives, which of course can result in deep depression for the rest of our life, or quite frankly, can result in suicide. And it is all those factors that made me say, how do I encourage people in this day and age to walk through their traumatic experiences, surrender their lives to a God they do not fully understand? Because I have decided in my life, Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne, I have decided in my life to live with some of the answers to my life and other people's lives. Just some of them. I don't have all the answers. If we knew everything about God, he wouldn't be much of a God. You know, I don't know much about my cat or my wife. So everybody surprises us. So
Can we delve into that a little bit, though, John? You know, you mentioned something interesting that, we either rebuild or we discard our lives. And you chose to walk through it, and you chose to engage this trauma, to take a look and to walk through it. Help our listeners sort of understand, what were some of your earlier reactions to trauma, and what made you willing to dive in and choose to rebuild your life rather than discard it?
Well, first understand that children's memories are built from three things: their own knee-high memories, because they're small, knee-high memories. Second are pictures that they have seen about themselves, and others are stories that adults have told them. You know, Aunt Millie and Grandma and things like that have told them, and then their memory bank gets filled up, and they say, oh, I can remember back when I was 2 years old. Well, I didn't have two of those three things. I didn't have pictures, and I didn't have stories. I only had my real memories. And so when I remember how they treated me in Greece, I don't remember my birth. I certainly don't remember being dropped off at the asylum, but I do remember being used and abused by one particular family. I'm guessing I stayed there for a couple of years. But that experience gave me nightmares till I was about 11 years old. And I mean really bad nightmares. I think I described some of them in the book. I mean, Sigmund Freud would have a heyday with my nightmares, but because he liked to interpret dreams. But those nightmares were phenomenal. And I can only say that the advice I give to others is because it happened to me, and here it is in a nutshell. The best way to help somebody who's gone through a traumatic experience is three real short things. One is be there. Those two words, be there. And my family was there all the time for me, all the time. They never gave up on me. And that pulled me out, clearly pulled me out. Be there with a hug. Be there with the words, I love you. Love, love, love. That's what Jesus said was the greatest commandment of all, was to love God and to love others as yourself. So when that's what the Heymanns did for me, I eventually grew out of the traumatic, not just the experience, but the memories and the nightmares. Also, they never did something else. The second idea is, don't act as if you understand if you haven't been through the experience. And my parents never did, the Heymanns. They never acted like they knew what it was like to be over in Greece. And quite frankly, I appreciated that, because children especially are bloodhounds, and they can sniff out your sincerity. They can sniff out if it just sounds like empty words when you say, hey, kid, I know just what you've gone through, when you haven't, you know? And the third,
looks like we might have lost John for a second here.
Here, am I back again?
Yep, you're back.
I'm sorry.
Yes, you are.
The third idea is prepare for the worst, but hope and pray for the best. And I know that's what my parents did for me. I'm not so sure they prepared for any of the worst, because I actually did not live a very good teenage life. You would think I would have, out of the gratitude of being adopted, but I didn't. And they, again, were so phenomenally loving through that time in my life as well. But that's why I wrote the book, is just to give people hope.
Mm-hmm.
You know, John, I'm so sorry. Go ahead, Roxanne.
No, go ahead.
I just was going to invite our listeners once again. You can call in and speak with Jon Heymann, the author of a brand new book that we highly recommend called Agonizing Peace, Powering Through Traumatic Experiences. You can find it at Amazon.com. And you can also join the conversation tonight by calling us at 1-855-237-2346, 1-855-237-2346, or email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. You know, Jon, I think so often when people experience traumatic experiences, and this may have been what you were alluding to, Roxanne, earlier, there's such a pendulum that we can go from, or really we're almost at a crossroads with how we can approach it. On the one hand, we can take that trauma and use it for the good. I oftentimes think that in many of our emotions, oftentimes share with us through our parishioners and in our daily messages, that within most of our emotions, whether it be fear, sadness, that we can either use it for the good or for the bad. A lot of people going through a trauma like yours, or for that matter, you know, we can all have our own experiences of what trauma is, and it can impact us in different ways. But for a lot of people, that can be depression and struggling with depression. I'd like to know, you know, is that something that you experienced? And if so, also just, you know, wanting to get your personal and professional guidance on this. Is depression just a medical condition? Is it hereditary from your parents and ancestors, or is it a result of our social factors? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, that's a powerful question. It's probably all the above and parts of all the above, what you just said. Medical condition, hereditary from our parents, and a result of social factors. Now, I don't know who my parents are. So the times that my moods, and I'm going to call them moods, have dipped to the wrong. At 3:18 in the morning, you wonder why you're living and what's the purpose of life. You have a choice. It's sort of like my son with his Jeep. You either rebuild or discard. You have a choice. Carl Jung said that, between a stimulus and a response. Stimulus is what happens to us. Our response, between the two, there's a choice. And when we choose, that's the power of the choice that God left us, that the animal world does not have. We have a choice to either fall at the foot of the cross or discard God. And eventually, when we discard God, we'll eventually fall into worse depression. I mean, think about this, guys. When somebody believes in God or when somebody doesn't believe in God, and a traumatic experience happens in both those situations, the resulting decisions are somewhat the same. In other words, for somebody that doesn't believe in God and then a traumatic experience happens, they get angry at God, the very God they said didn't exist. They get angry at God, or it drives them to the foot of the cross. It drives them closer to God. Very interesting. I've seen both. For those who believe in God and a traumatic experience happens, the same result. They either bow to the foot of the cross, they get closer to God, or quite frankly, some have gone. There was a boy a young boy, 10-month-old boy that died in our church when I pastored a church up in Rhode Island. And the marriage fell apart. The wife went off and lived a wild life, and the husband stayed true as he could to serving God. Two totally, same situation, totally different choices. So the power of choice that God has given us, free will, really makes a wild difference. But I would say that, if you don't mind me giving a piece of advice to somebody out there listening, if you drive a car, you know that when you get inside of your car, there's a rear view mirror. The rear view mirror, no matter how new or old the car is, no matter how expensive it is or cheap, there's still a rearview mirror. And it's about the same size in every single vehicle. I'm not sure if you ever noticed that. They've tested removing the rearview mirror, so you had an unobstructive forward view, and then they tested making the rearview mirror bigger, which restricted your forward view. And they ended up making the rearview mirror about 1/20th the size of the front focus. So think about this as a life lesson. For every 20 minutes we use in our life, we should look backwards 1 minute and 19 minutes forward. Often when we are in depression, we do the opposite. We think backwards for 19 minutes and forward for 1. Or if we're going to use the side mirrors, that's comparing ourselves to other people. You know, why doesn't my brother suffer from this? Why didn't his kid die? It's so many comparisons that we do, which sometimes can put us into a deeper depression. But the rearview mirror is the lesson. Spend 17 minutes looking forward. What are you going to do next day? What are you going to do next hour? And spend a minute looking backwards. You know, Dr. Roxanne, in your counseling, you have to look backwards a lot with your clients, to try to explain what's going on in the present. But you don't want them to live back there again with the comments about you're too fat, you're never going to make it, you're a loser, or a traumatic experience far greater than just what people have called you. So you do have to look back, but looking forward is so radically important for people to pull themselves out of the concept. Look at Tony Dungy, the famous football coach. He once said, the pain that you go through draws us back to God. That's pretty powerful from a guy whose 18-year-old son committed suicide. Highly successful coach, but his son took his own life. That is amazingly powerful. That is a choice he made, and it has made him live the life he has. What a fantastic testimony. There are many, Corrie ten Boom, Viktor Frankl, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. There's so many you can read about. Even the author of the song, It Is Well With My Soul, if you've sang that recently. He lost 5 of his children, 4 to a drowning on a boat. And when he went to join his wife, the captain of that boat brought him and said, this is where your wife's accident happened, the previous boat, and your daughters were killed. And he turned around at that moment and penned those words, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. Wow, I don't know what I would have penned. I don't know what I would have put to paper. Right. But the strength of some...
I think we lost you there for a second there, Jon.
Here we go. I apologize for that. My phone keeps glitching. The strength of some people's faith, or can I put it in a modern term, the strength of some people's muscle memory. What do they turn to? What do they automatically turn to in a time of trouble? What is absolutely automatic? And that's muscle memory. You practice the unusual until it becomes usual. You practice the uncomfortable over and over and over again until it becomes comfortable. I think of Adam Sandler's movie Happy Gilmore with that illustration. Anyhow, go ahead.
So, a lot of people who've experienced agonizing trials in their life and difficult seasons, can often look at it as, faithfuls even can look at it as tests from God, or, feeling like there's sort of a chess piece in his universe, and sort of ask themselves the question of, why does he allow these things to happen? And these are certainly ideas or questions that keep people awake in the middle of the night who are living in an agonizing situation. What are your words of wisdom for people who struggle with this notion?
God is testing me. I've heard that from a young man just a few months ago. Sat at a restaurant. He says, sometimes I wonder if I'm not a pawn in a big chess game. And I said, God doesn't play with your life, because then why am I going through this? And all I could think of was Epcot. They have the test track there. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but they tell you how they test cars, the speed, the brakes, the safety. But in a real test track from Ford and Chevrolet and GM and all, they do test the cars, and they put them through stress and strain to see what the car can do. And I believe that life sometimes tests us to see what we're capable of doing. Viktor Frankl said, I hope we don't pray for a lighter load, but a stronger back. And when life tests us, it's not for God to see what we can get, what we can go through. It's for us. It's for us. Because the opposite would be this. If you want to avoid all stress and pressure, then say nothing, do nothing, be nothing. But even Hans Selye, I think he was the one that coined all those, I'm stressed out kind of things. He said there's distress, which is negative stress, and then there's eustress, EU stress, which is good stress. It's the term we use, we work well under pressure, that kind of a person. We work well under pressure. So I illustrate it with a basketball, and I say, if you want to change your muscle memory, you must believe the basketball, that when you push the basketball down, it will bounce back up. When you push it down harder, it will bounce back higher. That is what we were created to do and to be. And I have a slightly depressed basketball. When I'm in certain audiences, I ask somebody to come out of the audience and dribble it. And as soon as they push it down, it just plops. It stays there. I said, what's wrong with this basketball? And of course, the answer is it doesn't have enough pressure. It's kind of opposite of what we do to a lot of people. It doesn't have enough pressure. It doesn't have too much pressure. It doesn't have enough pressure. It's depressed. So there you go. See if you can turn that into a syllabus in a graduate class. Anyhow, but the basketball is a lesson for us. We were made to bounce back up. The whole study of resiliency. We were made to bounce back higher when we were pushed down harder. And again, there are so many stories of people that have been, and I think our muscle memory is part of us reading more accounts of people that have overcome. What has God done in their life? Because our thinking prepares us for the unexpected. And Jesus said, not unexpected. He said, in this world, expect trouble. So I've often said, if you're looking for a feel-good book, this isn't it. This is not going to make you feel bad. But my thought on peace comes from Jesus at the end of his life when he agonized in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he prayed. He prayed to such an agony level that he sweat drops of blood. They call it hematidrosis. It's a real physical thing. Very few people ever experience it, but Jesus did. But the question we have to ask at that moment when he was saying, Lord, please take, or Father, please take this from me, was he at peace? And my answer is yes, he was at peace, but it was agonizing. But the ultimate question, or excuse me, the ultimate sentence he said was, not my will, but yours be done. So do I wish I knew all the answers of God? I don't know them all. But I'd rather have some of the answers than the atheists who have no answers. And I mean, they have no answers.
So the surrendering is really what you're referring to. And when Jesus, found it was the agonizing peace was, take it from me, but the peace is in the surrender.
Yeah.
Do you feel as though there was a moment in your life when you surrendered to this struggle and this reality that was yours?
Yeah, I remember thinking all through my teen years that life owed me something. It was an oxymoron to say that I deserved more, but you've heard of survivor's guilt, where, a plane crashes and 6 people live. Not only are they grateful that they lived, but they do ask some ultimate deep questions, such as why me and not somebody else? Or if one of their family members died and they didn't, why wasn't it me and not my daughter or my son? And these are tough, tough questions to go through. But the concept of surrender, when you think deeply about it, and this is what I learned in my writing. I'd never seen this before. Perhaps somebody else has written about it. If I read the rest of your book, maybe you have it in there. But I remember September 2nd, 1945. I don't remember. It's before I was born. But the Japanese surrendered on the USS Missouri. When a wartime surrender occurs, one side loses. One side loses. But biblical surrender, that's not the case. When we surrender to God, we win. We win. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, God has not given us a spirit of timidity, which actually means puny-souled, fearful, not able to put up with anything. That didn't come from God. If we're puny-souled or timid these days, that didn't come from God. But it says God did give us power, love, and self-discipline, a sound mind, self-discipline. That's powerful. I mean, the root word for power is dunamos. We get our English word dynamite from that. God made us dynamite. He wants us to change the world, even through our traumatic experiences. Certainly the Apostle Paul did. Peter did. John did. Even though he was not martyred, he was exiled to the island of Patmos. You guys know where that is. And so there's so many stories of surrendering to God's will, not knowing what might happen, expecting even the unexpected. Sometimes it's really wonderful, and sometimes it's not. And I wish I knew why. I mean, even that movie or the TV series, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I forgot the name of it, but it has one scene in it where one of the disciples comes and says, why haven't you healed me, Jesus? Jesus, you have healed so many. And really, when you look at the New Testament honestly, he did not heal everybody. He healed one person here, he healed another here, raised Jesus from the dead, Jairus' daughter, but not all of them. He just didn't.
Right.
So sometimes wonderful things happen and sometimes not so wonderful things happen. And I still trust the God that gives me some of the answers. Not all of them, but some of them, because even Paul said we look through a glass darkly.
What have you?
Well, I think, I'm so sorry, Roxanne. Go ahead, please.
No, go ahead, sweetie.
Thank you, Ann. So I think that one of the things that I think we're, in our ministry as a priest and psychologist, and obviously you, Jon, as well as in your career and obviously in writing this book, we come across so many people who have stories of trauma and how it impacted them. And as we've been talking about it, you used it in a way really to inspire and encourage people. And again, for our listeners, the book is called Agonizing Peace, Powering Through Traumatic Experiences. And this book really is I believe, a tool that one should just have, because we all can go through that. I always tell people that you're either you're either on your way into a traumatic situation or in a traumatic situation or coming out of it. And so we all go through that. And so often, as you're beautifully sharing with us, Jon, is that we're just not prepared. But I want to switch gears a little bit, because I think for so many people too, the natural thing to do in those times of when you're experiencing trauma is to play the blame game. And the one who oftentimes gets the brunt of all of our frustration, anger is God. In fact, we oftentimes say, "Why, God? Why do we even hear the adage that why do bad things happen to good people?" If there is a God, why do you think? What would you tell people who may be listening to our show tonight, who may be going through a difficult, traumatic situation right now, and who are blaming God? Why is this happening to me? What would you say to them?
Well, that's a really good question. I remember when I was pastoring up in Rhode Island, there was a woman, an elderly woman, that I would go see every once in a while. And she would tell me, "Don't come over to my house to see me unless you're willing to eat lunch." Now, what's important here is this woman was blind. She was cooking in the kitchen and she was blind. Anyhow, and she was on dialysis 3 times a week. And I never heard that woman complain, ever. She is a champion in my mind of what it means to have inner contentment through reconciliation with outer circumstances. That's a definition that I give to it. Inner contentment through reconciliation with outer circumstances. But to truly answer your question, everybody, whether you believe in God or not, does not believe that the world is in a perfect state. The Bible says it's not in a perfect state. Scientists say it's not in a perfect state. We're not in a perfect state. We still have diseases galore. So that's the reality of, quite frankly, sin, as described in the Bible. There is no other explanation for it. The other is the reality of pain from sin, from a world that's not functioning as God intended it, will come pain. And it will always come when we least expect it, probably. But there's still a God that's there. Peace is used 417 times in the Bible. And all I can say to folks is, when we trust that God knows what he's doing, that this earth, this existence of ours is like a parade on the other side of a fence, and we haven't seen it. And we walk up to the fence, which is taller than us, and we look through a tiny peephole, and that's all we see of the parade. And we make guesses about what life is about. When God is on top of the fence, looking from beginning to end, and knows exactly everything. We don't, but he does. And so once again, if we knew everything about God, he wouldn't be much of a God. I wish I knew more. I really do. But to put my faith in God and to receive the gift, the charis, the grace of God, which is a gift. To be as dumb as having presents under a Christmas tree and somebody says, "Oh, this one's for you, Jon," and I take the present and I never open it. Why would I not open it? Why would I not want to see what it is and enjoy not just the joy of the present, but also the person who gave it? That's why God gave us his grace. He wants us to open it up. He wants us, and he is there all the time, and he loves us. Again, that advice about folks who are in depression, be there and say, I love you. That's what God has done. For God so loved the world. It's only used twice in the Bible. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. That's a powerful verse.
I think
Absolutely.
for so many people that, you know, and I'm sure there was a transformational point, you know, where you went from, you know, as a teenager, the world owes me something, to, gee, I'm going to surrender to this and use it for good. And I'd like to hear more about that fork in the road. I do think for so many people, the trauma defines them for a very, very long time. There isn't the fork in the road when they decide to surrender and to decide that there is something else that can define them. And a lot of times, you know, that's sort of a sticking point for people. And I think that would be helpful for you to speak life into maybe what helped you in creating that own fork in your world.
That is also a wonderful question, and there is definitely a specific time that happened. I was 18 years old. I had not lived a very good life through my teenage years. I was doing a lot of bad things. I could have been arrested for some of them, and I was going to a youth group up in New Jersey, and a youth pastor named Bruce just poured his life into me, and I didn't respond. And then I was doing some things. My parents found out what they were. I still to today I don't know how. And they've both gone on to be with the Lord. But Bruce called me in his office one day, and he said, John, I've poured my life in, and he really had, spent a lot more time with me, and I never, ever responded. And he said, you are like that horse. And I said, what horse? And he said, you know, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And I said, yeah. I said, that's me. And this is what I learned from him. He didn't say this, but this is what I've learned from him. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But you can feed him salt. Do you catch that? It creates a thirst. And he is the one, and my parents, but he is the one that created a thirst in me that very day to know why do you do what you do, Bruce? I don't care what you drive. I want to know what drives you. And I already loved the guy, even though I was doing bad things. But when he confronted me and risked his relationship with me, I knew he loved me. And I wanted more and more and more of that. So I committed to my parents after I got caught. I committed to my parents I would go to a Bible college for 1 year. A little of it was just get me out of here. But some of it was, okay, I want to know what makes Bruce tick, because he really is dedicated to this thing called the Bible. And I got to Northeastern Bible College, which sadly doesn't exist anymore, up in New Jersey, a fully accredited college. That's how I was able to get into the graduate school, University of Rhode Island and University of Florida. Anyhow, I got there, and a guy named Jim Bjornstad, he might be listening to the radio broadcast right now because he has gotten notice of it, and I want him to help me write the second book, and one of the chapters in there is going to be the power of apologetics. So you know where I'm going. I fell in love with apologetics. And if anybody in the radio world knows what I'm talking about, and that is, you got to have the reason behind your faith. Faith is the evidence behind evidence of things not seen. I wanted to know the evidence of things not seen. I knew faith was a leap, but I didn't want it to be a blind leap. I wanted evidence. That was
one of my favorite shows. That was one of my favorite areas of study as well, John, just to politics. I still enjoy it right now, but I love the fact that you and I have a similar love for knowing why we do what we do and having and going to the deep end of the pool, as we oftentimes say.
Yeah. Well, maybe you and I need to write part of this too.
Exactly.
I love the study of apologetics. You know, Josh McDowell, C.S. Lewis. Everybody knows C.S. Lewis for the Chronicles of Narnia and Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But Mere Christianity, oh my gosh, that is such a powerful book. Yeah.
John, I want to allow our listeners to have an opportunity before our show concludes tonight to call in. The phone number to call in, for instance, if you'd like to speak with John, is 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. Please, you can also email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. And if you're just tuning into our show, you'll definitely be able to download this podcast later on. You'll find it on our website at thelouhs.com. as well as on Ancient Faith's Facebook page and on their website as well. We're talking with Jon Heymann, whose story of really is just truly inspiring and motivating us and encouraging us. And it's the story, I think all of us may not have such an extreme story as Jon does, but no doubt that we can go through times in which we experience times of trauma, and we need to have that faith. So the book is called Agonizing Peace, Powering Through Traumatic Experiences. You can find it at Amazon.com. That's Agonizing Peace, Powering Through Traumatic Experiences.
Question for Jon that had come in through our Facebook page is from a husband whose wife experienced significant childhood trauma. And his question is this: how do you love someone through it, being there for them as you spoke to earlier, when the person you're trying to love doesn't allow you to love them? He speaks about his wife frequently pushing him away, lashing, falling into anger, has a very critical inner voice, and it's very hard to love someone who won't let you love them. What would your wisdom be?
First of all, I really believe that when your marriage is that tough to experience every day, when the love is not coming back that you're exercising towards your wife, I really do think you probably need some professional help. Seriously, I'm not trying to be a joker. I'm not trying to assuage the question. Would there be a time or a way that you could express that to your wife? There's not anything you can do that will stop me from loving you. I don't know, perhaps you've already said that 300 times. I'm not sure. But you are experiencing one of the toughest things where a childhood experience has come into your adult life. Now, you may go back to your wedding and your dating days and say, how come I didn't see this at that time? And what has changed since then? But that would be for a professional to go over with you. That's what it would be. Now, I do have a piece of advice, and it's this. You should encourage your wife to believe the cheerleaders. What do I mean by that? It means that in every sport, there are cheerleaders on both sides of the game. There are cheerleaders cheering if you're playing in the game. There are cheerleaders that are cheering for your success. And there are cheerleaders that hope you do not kick the goal. You do not make the basket. You do not get the touchdown. Who are the ones that believe in you? Who are the one? If you make a choice, here we're back to choice again, between a stimulus and a response, there's a choice. Who do you believe in your life on an everyday basis? Do you believe the cheerleaders or those in the stands that are cheering for your success? Could it be your mom? Sir, I would like to think that one of her cheerleaders is you. She should write down 1 or 2 names at least. The list can get bigger as the days go on, and put those names on the refrigerator door, the most opened and closed door in the house, so that every time she opens the door to get a glass of milk or water or get out some leftovers, she's reminded of the people that absolutely love her and are cheering for her success, rather than believing the people that have hurt her in her past. So that's about all I can do on a radio broadcast, but I hope that's helpful.
Very helpful. Very helpful. And maybe we could sort of move into, the question of peace and contentment. They're not exactly the same thing, right? So sometimes when we sort of enter an agonizing peace or a peace about our circumstance, would you say that we always arrive at contentment in that peace?
I think contentment and peace probably could be used interchangeably. I've heard one very famous, and I kind of like this statement, one famous motivational guy that says contentment is the enemy of growth. And I get his point. In other words, if we're content to just have what we have, be who we are, think what we think, then we will never grow. I get that. But true contentment is far deeper than that and probably could be interchanged with the word peace. I go back to Paul in talking from the prison. I have learned to be in abundance, he said. I have learned to be without. That anywhere I find myself, I'm content. Wow. Now that doesn't mean he just went, I'm not, because in one of the books he wrote, he said the whole Praetorian Guard has heard the gospel. That means he didn't sit still in his cell and moan his situation. And by the way, if anybody knows those old Roman prisons, you had to be fed from outside the prison. They didn't give you food. They didn't give you clothing. So somebody had to come to the prison to drop off food for you, and it better not be good food, because the guards are going to eat it. It better be really bad food. So here's a guy falsely accused and saying, I'm going to be content from where I am. And all I can think of in our American culture is that if we really, and by the way, this is one of the tools for getting out of depression, and that is cite somebody that needs your help and go out and do something about it. Care for somebody else. It's a difference between caring and comparing. Caring for others rather than comparing ourselves with others. And if you take those three little letters, what is it, OMP, only my possessions, out of the word compare, you're left with care. In other words, when we stop thinking about what we own and who owns more than us and all the rest, we'll start to care for other people. But peace and contentment can be used interchangeably, and they are not the enemy of growth at all.
And I would love for you to speak a little bit into, people who have taken their own lives as a result of or reaction to trauma, that they didn't believe that there was a choice. People who, couldn't contend with the notion of rebuilding their life or surrendering to it, or, sort of accepting it and sort of finding that peace about their past. How would you encourage those, who love other people who are walking through trauma? How would you encourage them to help someone who has contemplated suicide and maybe has even acted on that at times? What would your recommendations be to them?
Well, Dr. Roxanne, you probably have experienced this in your practice, I would guess. I remember back when I was a pastor in New York, not Rhode Island, but in New York, a pretty wealthy family. The father was going crazy. It's the only person I have ever seen in my life foam at the mouth. He was so angry. I've never seen that before or after. I mean, true foaming at the mouth. About 3 months later, I won't go into the detail because you'd all go, holy cow, that happened to you as a 23-year-old pastor? Yeah. Anyhow, he committed suicide on their lake, right at the edge of their lake. The year after, their older son, there were 3 kids, their older son took his life with a rifle. And it was Christmas Day. And the brother-in-law and I went down to get him because he was supposed to be there for dinner, and he was not alive. So there are those that carry it out. I have to say, I never act as if I understand. I don't act as if I understand, because I don't completely. I mean, I understand it theoretically. People go into such depression, they feel no sense of reason to live. Back to the rearview mirror. There's no forward focus for them. They just believe that life has dealt them a really bad set of cards and God is not interested in them, and they believe that they're a pawn. Once you start believing that, that's why I use the word muscle memory. We have to talk about mental muscle memory, practicing our thought life, practicing our thinking and our faith so that it expects the unexpected. Oh my gosh, I just lost my job. That is the straw that breaks the camel's back. My gosh, my wife just ran out on me. My gosh, my husband's messing around with somebody at work. Whatever it might be. Our house just burned down. Or in this case of the guy that wrote "It Is Well With My Soul," it wasn't just the loss of his children. He lost his whole business. Right. All of his property burned in the great Chicago fire. I mean, this man lost everything. Mm-hmm. How did he have the mental muscle memory that most people don't have? Is what I believe people that are in depression or contemplating suicide, that's what they should be studying. They should be mimicking those that pulled themselves out. They should be mimicking those that made different decisions. And so back to the idea, be there for them, prepare for the worst. I've had to tell folks within my family to do the same, to prepare for the worst. You pray and you hope for the best. I don't remember who said it, But somebody said, pray as if it all depends on God and work as if it all depends on you when you're trying to help somebody going through this. When they have committed suicide and you're trying to give counsel to the family, you know, I think of all my training. It doesn't train you very well for times like that. And the ministry doesn't train you very well. You go to a house. We had, I think I said at the beginning of this interview, we had 6 teenagers die in one night. Horrendous accident. I mean, awful accident. And I went to the scene of the accident, talked to the parents. There was a viewing a couple days after, closed casket, obviously. The funeral. Well, when I was visiting with some of the parents, even afterwards, I just felt like my prayers and my words were empty. I really did. And I would walk out of meeting with the parents saying, I don't know that I did any good. But the opposite, you know, when you think about the opposite, okay, don't go see them. Don't pray for them. Don't give them a hug. Don't tell them you love them. Oh my gosh, that's not what we're called to do. So sometimes I would just say, I did what I was called to do. I did what I was called to do. And I think anybody listening to this who has a relative who is deep in depression, just do what you're called to do. Be there, hug them, say you love them. Don't act as if you understand, and prepare for the worst, but pray and believe the best.
I mean,
I don't know if that answered the question.
And yeah, sure. I mean, those 2 words, be there, I mean, to me, you know, ring so true in anybody's brokenness, that when we are willing to enter into that experience with them and learn from them as we walk, you know, side by side with them. We don't pretend to understand, but as we spend time in their story, we start to get a little bit of it, you know, here and there, and we're not afraid to be there in that pain with people. And I feel like that's the thing most people are afraid to do, is to be present in people's pain. And so I love those 2 words, is to be there. And as we're wrapping up the show, Jon, you know, and you really opened up such a big topic that we could spend really hours delving into. There's a lot of questions I have about the different stages and seasons of your life in reaction to trauma that I know others will get to read about all in the book, Agonizing Peace, Powering Through Traumatic Experience. But just in the final minutes of our show, Jon, any last words of wisdom that you would like to leave our listeners? And please also let our listeners know where they can find your book.
You can find the book on Amazon, and you can find it from the publisher, Caris Publishing. That's Kharis, publishing.com. It's there as well. On Amazon, it's in hardback, soft paperback, and it's also Kindle, and the Audible is being done as we speak. But my piece of advice probably would still come down to that simple thing I said a few minutes ago, and that is, in all these things, pray as if it depends on God, and work as if it depends on you. God does not bless laziness, and we are called to work. We're called to love, which sometimes takes a lot of work, and we're called to be there for other people. That's who we are, and that's what we're called to do.
I love that. Pray like it depends on God and work as if it depends on you. I mean,
right.
It's just so wise, and something that I think we can all make relevant in our lives in dark seasons, because we all experience them. As Nick said, you know, we're either walking out of one or we're moving into one. Well, Jon, thank you so much for taking the time to be on our show. Your book is full of transparency and is powerful. And so we really thank you for sharing your story. It's such a pleasure to know you, and we wish you all the best in sharing your story with others.
Thanks so much, Dr. Roxanne.
And we also want to thank Matushka Trudy for once again producing our show, and all the wonderful people here at Ancient Faith. Thanks to all of you for joining us each week. We appreciate your questions and your listenership, and we look forward to next week when we're going to be speaking about setting our priorities in the right direction. You don't want to miss that show. We look forward to being with you next week.
Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne are the authors